video is to match the values of these guys to their background. In order to do that, we need to add a black and white adjustment layer. Now, for some reason, CMYK images do not allow for black and white adjustment layers, but we're going to cheat that by pressing hue saturation, and we are going to take the saturation all the way down to 0, which is basically black and white. Alright, so that's ready to roll. Now that it's black and white, we can see that the background has fewer blacks than our image here. This is a little bit more contrasty. Our actual photograph of them is more contrasty than our black background image. So I'm going to click back on our athletes here. We're going to add a curves adjustment layer so that we can adjust the contrast of it accurately. And I only want to affect the layer below it, which means that I need to do a clipping mask. Two ways to do that. One is to make sure that the curves adjustment layer is selected, and then going here to the properties panel, that's where the clipping mask is. The other is to press Command Option G. Once I've done that, you can look over here and you can see that this now has a clipping mask applied with this arrow pointing at the athlete layer below it. So this must be right above the athlete layer in order to clip to the athlete layer. Alright, the hue saturation adjustment layer is above it. We are going to delete that layer once we're done doing what we're about to do. Okay, so I need to reduce their contrast. There's too much black in here. So I'm going to take a look at this curves adjustment layer. I'm going to pay attention to where the black is and where the white is. The white is over here, black is up here. So this is the black part. I'm going to attempt to lighten my black. So I'm going to add a point right here, and I'm going to drag it down and to the left, and you can see how that's affecting my image. Right? So that's a little bit closer there, right? We're matching it a little bit closer. That seems to have washed them out a little bit. I'm going to take a look down here at the bottom, see if I can bring some of that back up. So I have kind of an S curve here, where the blacks or dark grays are brightened, but the lighter grays are darkened. And that's creating an image right here that seems to match that background a little bit better. Now I can check the results of this in color by hiding the black and white adjustment layer and try to make sure that that seems to match between the two images. That looks pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and delete my hue saturation layer. Okay, now I don't remember what step we're on right now. We can go back to our notes here, 10 steps to good photo composites. If we view our student work, we're going to have to pull one of you guys who took notes. Alright, Jesse's got some good notes here. So, getting good selection of the image, match the direction of light, we did that in our photo. Match the perspective, we did that. Make sure the horizon line is correct. Correcting lighting and contrast, there we go. Correct saturation. Alright, so we are here correcting the saturation. Alright, so in order to do that, we need to make that special adjustment layer. So I'm going to go over to the right here where it says adjustments. Because this adjustment layer is not available in the adjustment layers down here, it seems to only be available up here. We're going to create that selective color adjustment layer. We're going to let it apply to the entire thing because it's going to work kind of like that black and white adjustment layer by allowing us to see how the saturation is between the two. So we're going to drop all of the blacks or each of the color modes in here. I'm going to make sure it's absolute when I do that. So absolute, drop the blacks for the reds. Then we're going to take the yellows, take the blacks, slide it all the way to the left, take the greens, take the blacks, slide it all the way to the left, take the cyans, take the blacks, slide it all the way to the left, take the blues, blacks, slide it all the way to the left, and take the magentas, take the blacks, slide it all the way to the left, whites. This time we're talking about tones, so we'll take the blacks and we'll slide it all the way to the right. Neutrals, black, slide it all the way to the right. 100%, there we go. And take the blacks, slide it all the way to the right. Okay, so we end up with this weird kind of image where we're trying to see if we can match the saturation between these two images, right? Now we could do that by going into the individual color settings in here and seeing if we could try to get the saturation levels to match. You can see the blues in the sky aren't quite as saturated as their pants, but their pants are as saturated as the greens. So that seems to be pretty good. I'm going to simply select the curves adjustment layer because I'm going to add my saturation adjustment layer above it. And I'm going to go to hue saturation. And I'm going to take a look at seeing if I can match the saturation between their clothes and the ground. So I increase the saturation a little bit. Oh, I forgot to clip it. Sorry, here's the layer. I need to clip it, so it's either Command Option G or clicking there. I'm going to press Command Option G. That clips it. Now my saturation should only be affecting that layer. I'm going to crank it. You can see what it's doing there. That's not quite right. That's too much. You can see he started turning orange and she started turning orange, so that's not good. If I go in the opposite direction, I can see that starts to drop them out of the saturation, so that definitely doesn't match. So the effects of this are what I'm looking at. I want the saturation to look just right, and I think right about 28 is what I thought, somewhere around there. Seems to be pretty good. Let me turn off my selective color, and their saturation seems to match okay. Maybe I'll crank it a little bit more. Just need to watch their skin tones. I'm going to go to 40%. That looks pretty good because that background grass is very saturated. So I want that to match there. Alright, so we're done with the selective color adjustment layer. The next thing we need to do, if we go back to our notes here, is we need to create shadows and create the absorption of light. Alright, so let's go back here. And the first type of shadow we need to create is right directly underneath their feet. That is the base shadow. The shadow's darkest and hardest directly where they touch the ground. So they look like they're levitating right now. That's not good. So we need to create a layer in between the athlete layer and the stadium layer. So I'm going to click on the stadium layer. We're going to add a new layer, and we're going to call this new layer base shadow. Alright, perfect. Turn. Now that layer is currently empty. So I'm going to go to my brush tool here. I'm going to look at my brush settings. If your brush is still oval from the rhinoceros, please make sure that it's correct. It should be an straight angle. There we go. If it's oval, you simply need to expand it back out to being circular, and then The size of it we'll correct over here once we're there. The hardness should be 0 right now. Alright, my foreground color should be black. So that's the color of the shadow. I'm going to zoom into their feet. And I'm going to make the size of the brush just a little bit bigger than the size of his toe. That's perfect. And the brush should go just below. Make sure. Oh, my opacity set to 50%. I want it at 100%. Please also make sure that you're painting normal right now. Flow can be 100%, all that stuff. That's the settings. Angle should be 0. There we go. Okay. So now when I paint with black, you can see it's creating that black shadow. So I'm going to come in here, just sort of paint along edge, create this nice soft shadow. I'm not going to worry too much about spill. If it's spilling too far out of there, I can correct that in just a moment. I shouldn't have a shadow above his shoe, but we'll fix that. That looks pretty good. We're going to come here, paint along the edges there. That's looking pretty good. She needs a shadow beneath her feet. That's looking all right. That foot. Back there. There we go. Okay. So it's not too bad. It looks like we've got a pretty good shadow on each of their feet. Some of it spilled over, so that's where I'm going to create a layer mask. So I have my base shadow selected here. I have some areas where I didn't want it to paint, so I'm going to hide that by putting a layer mask on here. So now I'm painting on the layer mask, so wherever I paint with black, so these are switched with black, it's going to hide that. So I can actually paint here and get rid of the shadow that's above her foot. That shouldn't be there. Around the front side, that shouldn't be there. Maybe point out a little bit too far there. So I'm just hiding bits of that. That part actually looks semi-decent. A little bit tighter there. If I went too far, I could paint with white. Get back. Front of the toe to get a little bit darker there. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Continue painting with black. That side of his shoe shouldn't have it. The front of his shoe should. Let's get a little bit in there. Some of that. Some of that. A little bit too far there. A little bit back in there. Perfect. Okay, switching back and forth between black and white to make that base shadow really look solid. Nice. Okay, those base shadows look pretty good. So I'm going to click on this layer. Now I'm going to blend that black with the background colors even more by changing the layer blending mode to overlay. So I'm switching to overlay, and you're going to see that now the black actually starts to mix with the color of the grass and create a more realistic shadow. So that looks pretty good right there. The next step is to create the cast shadows. So I'm going to create another layer here. I'm going to call this cast shadows. And the cast shadows have everything to do with where the light is coming from. You don't have to do this, but I just want to show you where the lights are coming from. So I'm going to select my line tool again, and there's light coming from here, and it's going to hit him in the vast majority of him. His shoe isn't casting that big of a shadow, but him, right about there, they're standing together, so the other side of that, starting right about there, pull this line out to where it's hitting her, right? And that's going to spread out to like there. Okay. So that's one direction. Now we have multiple light sources coming in multiple directions. So I've got 5 different light sources. So I could theoretically have 5 different shadows. We're not going to make it that complicated today, but we do want the fact that we've got light coming from all sides here. So I'm going to take a light from this direction. It's the same positioned light. I'm going to take this one. I'm going to cast that shadow in the opposite direction from him. There we go. He's casting it all the way to over here. And then the other side of that light. Somewhere right here. Kind of get out away from it so it stops trying to take that. There we go. Alright, comes through here. Cast the shadow off of their shoe there. Alright, so I've got pretty good direction of light, so that's where it's coming from. Going back to my cast shadow layer. Unfortunately, it's got that line on it. Want to get rid of that guy. Oh, dang it. Okay. Well, I'm going to need to create a new cast shadow layer because apparently it drew the line directly on it. Alright. So there's my base shadow. Here's cast shed. There we go. Alright. So I have a blank layer here that I can start drawing on. Remember from the Rhino, we use the polygonal lasso tool to create straight lines. These shadows are essentially going to be straight. So I'm going to come off of her feet over here, and I'm going to come towards where that shadow should likely end. So if that continues out here, that's about where it goes off the screen. So I'm going to click outside the edges of this, and she's coming to right about there. I'm going to stop right about there, and there we go. Alright, so there's one of the shadows. I'm going to fill that with black. So that's either edit, fill, black. Okay. Or, my favorite is to use option, delete, which fills it with the foreground color. Alright, there's that cast shadow. So we'll call that cast shadow right, I guess. Alright, cast shadow right. Perfect. Okay, shadows are generally blurry, not hard-edged, especially with the light so far away. So we're going to make sure that that's deselected. So that was Command D to deselect. I'm going to apply a blur, Gaussian blur, and I want it to be about 30 pixels. 100 pixels is a bit much. 30 pixels is perfect. There we go. There's that one. Now it should fade out the further away she gets from the ground. So it's darkest the closest it is to the ground, and then it gets lighter the further she gets from the ground. So I need a layer mask again. So there's my layer mask. Boom. I'm going to take this gradient tool. I'm going to go up here. I'm going to make sure that my foreground color is black. Going up here to my basics. And I'm going to choose foreground to transparent. That's this middle one under basic. Foreground to transparent is great for my gradient because when I draw it from here to here, draw it as many times as I want, and it's going to give me foreground to transparent, which means it won't mess up my original gradient. There we go, move that out of the way. I want it to, again, kind of fade quickly. That looks pretty good. So I'm done with that gradient. Select my selection tool here. Okay, here we go. I'm going to select the actual shadow here, not the gradient mask. I'm going to select the shadow. I'm going to choose overlay again. And then I'm going to adjust the opacity until I'm happy with the darkness of that shadow. I'm going to say about 70% on that guy. That looks pretty darn good. Okay, so I'm going to repeat the process on the opposite side here. Again, there's a light traveling from that direction. I need another shadow. So we're going to add a layer. We're going to call this cast shadow left. Sorry for my typing problems here. There we go. Cast shadow left. Perfect. Again, take the polygonal lasso tool. Come out from them there to about there. All the way out to the side. Up to where that's going to intersect. And then back to him. And close my loop. There we go. So that needs to be filled with black. I still have black as my foreground color, so Option Delete fills that with black. Deselect, Command D. Filter, Gaussian Blur. I can use the same exact filter. Since I did it once, all I have to do is repeat it again. Boom, same thing. Apply the layer mask. Grab your gradient tool. Same one is still selected. Try and go in the same direction that I went for her. Figure out where I want this to start disappearing a little bit more vertically like that. That's actually pretty good there. My selection tool, this guy, overlay, opacity, 70%, I think. What I said, something like that. They should look very similar. Okay, they don't look like they're fading enough as it's going away, so I'm going to take a look at that gradient mask again. I'm going to bring that black a lot closer. See if I can get it to fade faster. That one looks good. Higher. Perfect. Bring that down lower. Perfect. Okay. So I like the shadows that I've created. I've got a base shadow. I've got cast shadows. If I wanted to be super uptight about it, I'd create 5 different shadows going in all directions, or maybe a couple more here, but they look good enough as it is right now. We're going to leave it there. Okay, since my shadows are created, I no longer need these lines, so I'm going to delete those. There we go. Should be gone. Why is that line still there? There it is. There's the culprit. There we go. Okay. So we've got our shadows. our lighting direction sort of matches because that's how we photographed it. We could add some shadows and highlights here, is what we're going to do next. So we're going to come above our athletes layer again. We're going to add another adjustment layer. So I want this one on top, so I'm going to select the hue saturation layer. I'm going to choose a curves adjustment layer. There we go. And for this one, I'm going to be painting in shadows. So I want everything on this to be darker. Okay, so there's the dark part. Looks darker. Okay. I want it to only apply to the layer below it. So again, I'm going to hit either this button here or Command Option G. Now they're the only ones that are darker. And since I want to be able to paint these shadows on, I don't want the whole layer to be darker. I'm going to select the layer mask. I'm going to fill it with black, so either edit fill black, or since my foreground color is black, Option delete. So that is currently doing nothing because it's hiding all of the dark pixels. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint back in with white onto them to create some shadows. So I'm going to paint with a little bit bigger brush. I want to make sure it's a nice soft brush. There we go. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to find some places where I think I need some shadows. Okay. Legs look really washed out right here. So I want some shadows along there, along the side of his shoe. Okay, in between those legs. Need some separation there. I'm going to have to make a smaller brush to separate those legs a little bit better. It's kind of a drastic adjustment right now, so I'm going to have to come back a little bit and reduce the opacity of the brush that I'm using. I'm going to say, 40%. There we go. So now, when I paint to adjust the shadow on that inner part of his thigh, it's darker. Good. The back part of this leg gets a shadow. Nice. Underneath that jacket needs a shadow. Okay, that's starting to look pretty good. She needs a shadow separating her legs, so we're going to draw kind of in there. Her shoes. On the side of this pant leg, shadow. Good. Good. Underneath her sweatshirt here. Great. Back side of him. Underneath the arm. Back side of the arm. Back side of her. Underneath her arm. Excellent. So we are getting some good shadows, darkening underneath shins, backside of hair. Excellent. Alright, so we've got our shadows, and if we wanted to, we could go with some highlights. For our sake, for today, we're going to stop there with the shadows that we added to their pant legs, because I think that was the main thing that looked kind of washed out. You can go ahead and adjust this even more by reducing the opacity to maybe like 20% or 15%. because there's kind of a weird contrast on his legs. But we're going to stop there for today.